One of the concepts often at the forefront of Christianity is faith versus works. Terms referring to works and referring to faith appear in a number of the New Testament books, but the references in the epistles of Paul tend to be preferred. For example, Romans 4 refers to Abraham and righteousness, and it uses the events of Genesis to say, "But to him that worketh not, but believeth on him that justifieth the ungodly, his faith is counted for righteousness." Notice how it refers to belief and faith apart from works, just as Paul does in other verses. This is different from how James describes it. In the Pauline epistles, works are contrasted with faith. They are treated as separate and even opposing concepts. And naturally, this faith versus works paradigm influences how one looks at the law. If one is coming from the angle of the Pauline teachings, then the teachings of the law need to be forced into that framework that Paul set up after the fact. The problem is that the law has no such paradigm. The concept of faith versus works is completely foreign to how the law describes itself. The idea of believing in the promises and the idea of opposing works is not a part of the law. Where did the commands ever say anything about that? And it's not just that faith and works should be considered as going together. It's that the concept altogether is not a part of the law. Whenever the law describes righteousness, it says that it comes through observing the law, as we can see in Deuteronomy 6:25. It connects it with one of the purposes of the law, which we can see in the preceding verses. It does not say that righteousness is separate from the law, but instead it connects righteousness with it. We can look to what the law says in the sense of looking at a verse or two occasionally, or even in the sense of just reading through the law. But this leads us to very different conclusions than we would gain by focusing on the law. By focusing on the law by itself, to the exclusion of Pauline and other works, we will start to come to some very different conclusions. And it is true that someone might refer to this as picking and choosing. One might say that by not paying attention to everything as a whole, clearly a person would start to gain a different perspective that may or may not be legitimate. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that for the Israelites, this was the entirety of it. 3,000 years ago, someone could not have said to read Romans and Galatians and learn what the law really intended. The way Israel is supposed to learn how to serve him is through the reading of the law, which we can see described in Deuteronomy 31:10 through 13. This is the entire context for the law and how it is to be taken. This is the whole of it. These outside concepts that were forced upon the law later, such as the faith versus works paradigm, if they cannot be shown through the law itself, then it is not how Israel learned the law. It isn't relevant for how a person is to learn and observe the law. So if a person is learning the law from the law, as Deuteronomy 31 prescribes, then he would see that the commands are for all of the days and assume that it's telling the truth. And he would see that righteousness comes through guarding to do the law. And he would see that it is the choice of life and good versus death and evil. The only reason a person would even want to diligently seek to do the commands of the law is because he believed. Belief is already assumed in the law, because loving him and fearing him is already a part of the commands. The question is not that of faith versus works, but Are we going to seek what is good and right in His sight? Are we going to seek to love Him in the way He asked us?